let's do like a scale of 1 to 10. And in the chat also, a scale of 1 to 10. How realistically excited are you for this upcoming 76ers season? Of course, crazy people like us, we're on a 10 no matter what because it's Sixers basketball. It could be the process. I'm still excited that NBA is about to start, But scale of 1 to 10, taking everything into consideration and the roster and how they looked last year and what they did this off season. What you go first, Sean, and then I'll give you mine.
I'll go 9.5 to give myself a little bit of point 0.5 wiggle room, but that really just has to do with like the health concerns and the fact that you can't win a championship from day one, that there's going to be a long process to get there. I'm itching for the playoff setting to see this team, but obviously like it's a long path until we get to that point. But realistically, I don't think this offseason could have gone any better than it did. The only thing that I will throw in there is I do wish Nico Batum was returning back, but you can't really fault Daryl Morey or the Sixers team for that. But bringing in Paul George, I think Caleb Martin is going to be a huge factor on this Sixers team. I do think that is going to be a guy that, like, as much as there will be all these bright lights and big names with Maxey, with Embiid, with Paul George, Caleb Martin is going to be a guy that I think is going to be a fan favorite pretty much across the board there. So very excited about that. And even the guys like Andre Drummond, I do think is going to make a difference. So I think this was just about as seamless of an offseason as could have possibly gone. I'm very excited about the Sixers team, and frankly, I did not expect to be at this point leading into the season. So shout out to Daryl Morey for making it happen.
Yeah, man. Like at least he went into the season with all of the what do we need type of stuff, and it seems like he got everything that we need. Backup center, 3-and-D role players, veteran, playoff tested players, all the way down to Reggie Jackson towards the end of buyout season. So, yeah, I'm gonna go 9. Also, just leeway for like, it could possibly be kind of a grueling type of season if we get into like a Kawhi Leonard style of load management where Paul George plays one night, Joel Embiid plays another night. You don't really see them play together too many games. It could turn into something like that. I don't want it to. Obviously, we want the whole team to play every night, but at the same time, the goal is to be healthy by the time the playoffs come around. That's always the goal. But yeah, that's the only concern really is I think that, and I'm so excited. It's unbelievable. It's probably really a 10. It probably is. The thing that I'm absolutely most excited for is not Paul George, is not healthy Joel Embiid, is not any player that they signed or added to the roster. It is year 5 Tyrese Maxey. I think Tyrese Maxey is about to take another leap. Every single season he's taken a leap. And I think he's about to take a leap this season that the rest of the NBA world is not quite ready for at all. They're not talking about him. They don't even understand, I think, what he's about to do. What he did in the playoffs was nothing short of amazing. The 2 50-point games in the playoffs, the only other players are Wilt Chamberlain and Allen Iverson. It's just, I think Tyrese Maxey could come close to actually being the leading scorer on this team this upcoming season. Not because Joel Embiid isn't as good as he can be, but I think Joel Embiid maybe takes a little bit of his foot off the gas as far as offensive, putting the entire team on his back. And, with Joel getting doubled and Paul George taking pressure, I mean, Tyrese Maxey, I just think he's going to have a field day with basically every NBA team. He could average 30. I really, really think that.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I still think he goes wildly underrated in the conversations across the best players in the NBA. That I think the national media and national just fans out there are unaware of just how good Tyrese Maxey is. And it is just crazy that every season he's not just gotten better, but taken notable leaps forward each season. And I expect the exact same this year. And you brought up a great point about Joel Embiid. That to me was my biggest takeaway from him experiencing the Olympics. Yes, it was cool to see him playing with the best guys. Yes, it was cool to see him winning a gold medal, get a taste of winning all these things. But the biggest thing that was noteworthy to me is him learning how to be effective in less of a ball-dominant role or less of a high-usage role. That Embiid's a guy who has never had under a 32% usage rate in any season of his career to this point. I would love to see a statistical reduction in his play this year. And that has nothing to do with a doubt in his ability or his play. When push comes to shove, we still know who Joel Embiid is as a talented basketball player. But I would love to see a little bit of more sharing the wealth, everybody getting involved, maybe drop that from 34 points per game, which is insane last year, to a little bit down in that like 25 to 28 range. I would be really happy with that from Joel Embiid's perspective, especially if that means more playmaking, especially if that means a more focused defense, rebounding the ball at a little bit higher rate. That's the winning version of Joel Embiid in my brain. And to be fair to Embiid here, this is a two-way street that he hasn't necessarily had the guys to lean on in past years, so I can't be overly critical about that. He finally does, and now that is how this team needs to click together. So that'll definitely be something I'm paying attention to throughout the length of the season.
Yeah, I think we can also expect probably that, Tyrese Maxey becomes more of a scorer every season. Joel Embiid's become more of a facilitator every season. And last year he averaged a career high 5.7, I think, assists per game. So, yeah, you could see his scoring come down, and you could see him become even more of a facilitator. I know a lot of people talk about his turnovers or whatever, passing out of double teams, but I think he's improved every year. I don't ever think he's going to be great at it because he's 7'2" and he's big and trips over his own feet sometimes, and things happen. It's just what it is when you have a man that big handling a basketball outside of Nikola Jokic, who's just 1 in a billion. But yeah, I think you could see his assists be even higher. I think you're going to see more Joel Embiid triple doubles this season. There was like 1 or 2 maybe last season. I think he could get into the 5 or 10 triple double range. And then again, yeah, having Paul George as a third option is probably well, it is the best thing they could have done. But I mean, it's just yeah. My excitement is a level 10. It really is, man.
Yeah, and even the pushback on the Paul George stuff, like there's obviously no such thing as the perfect basketball player in general, and kind of the critiques of Paul George, for the most part, I think fall on really only applying to him when he's the number 1 or number 2 option as far as the inconsistencies.
Exactly.
And I also think like the worst case scenario, he becomes a super like high level catch and shoot option for this team, and that's still a very functional and effective basketball player in the context of being around Joel Embiid. So like I get the concerns that like he's had his shortcomings, but I think this works for both Paul George and the Sixers, that Paul George himself realizes maybe the best role for me is to take a bit of a step back if I actually want to compete. And I honestly respect like the maturity that takes. Obviously, it comes with the dollar sign that's attached to it. This is solely motivated by good reasons there. When you think about Tobias Harris, once again, like the gap in talent as a basketball player between Paul George and Tobias Harris is so night and day different that we're talking miles of space there. And you just make that 1-for-1 swap in addition to adding these other talented players, the Caleb Martins, the Andre Drummonds, the Eric Gordons, who we have not brought up yet. This team is built for it in a way that I have not felt about the Sixers team in the entire Joel Embiid era.
Yeah, yeah, I agree completely. When you talk about Paul George and the things that are said about him, you're right. It applies to somebody who was expected to be leading a team deep into the playoffs, especially with Kawhi Leonard's health always up in the air. Maybe the best role for Paul George his entire career was a third option on a have 2 other really good scorers and him not be expected to be that. He's so talented, and he was so super talented early on in his career that maybe that superstar title put on him was just not really. I mean, he was a superstar, but maybe he's just not a guy that can put a team on his back and drag him across the finish line. But that's great because we don't need him to be that. That's not what we signed him for. We really signed him to be a very highly paid third option scorer. If we get to the point where something would happen and you're relying on Paul George to lead you, then you don't expect much to happen. So I just think it works out perfectly. If he's more of a nonchalant, it sounded like he didn't really care at the end of the season with the Clippers and things like that. It seems like a perfect situation for somebody like that. That's
Yeah,
what I think.
100% there. And like with all due respect to Paul George, there was a period of time in his early Indiana days where he was absolutely cold when he was going head to head with LeBron at the start in those Eastern Conference Finals. But let's not forget that was one of the more gruesome leg injuries I've ever seen that happened before that. That I think
Yeah.
there's been bit of a different Paul George, not as much as explosion, not as much athleticism. It's still a very good basketball player throughout that entire process. And like the Clippers, I think more blame is thrown in Paul George's direction than necessarily should be the case. That if you want to pin down why that failed, why they never reached their championship aspirations, the number one thing is obviously to me Kawhi's injury. That is the thing. Like you never could consistently rely on him, and that's what everything was built around. That even in full effect, we've seen Kawhi Leonard carry a team to a championship. Us here in Philadelphia have seen it firsthand, way clearer than we would like.
Healthy prime Kawhi was
unbelievable.
Yeah.
So, like with Paul George, he was always looked at as a bit of the running mate there, and he didn't have his leader to run with him far more often than I really think is the case. No, he was not perfect in Los Angeles, and I also like from the maturity standpoint, I think he's nailed everything since coming to the Sixers. His press conference, the way that he's spoken about guys, some of the podcast comments that are coming out. Obviously, it does not matter until you get on the floor and we see this as basketball. But I've loved everything I've seen about where Paul George's head is at, and to me, that is like important to note as you're kind of mixing in these personalities.
Yeah, speaking of guys losing athleticism as they age, I was watching some Joel Embiid early career highlights last night, and the absolute explosion and bounce that he had off the ball was crazy. And I try not to take athletes for granted. I try to watch as much as I can and cherish it because it's gone really fast. His career has, it's 8 years long now in what feels like 2 to me. But looking at the Olympics and how he played and the narrative of him being out of shape like, what do you think? Do you think he's just aging and getting slower? Do you think it has to do with his compounding knee injuries every year? What do you think it is? Because there's definitely, when you watch those early highlights, a clear difference. I mean, he was flying off the ball. He was dunking and landing and jumping, and now he dunks and he does a somersault because he doesn't want to land on his knees. What do you think? Do you think he's out of shape? Do you think it's just compounded injuries? Do you think he's just, what do you think?
Yeah, I think injuries is the number one reason. That's the first thing that I'll go to here, that we can't ignore the amount of knee injuries that this guy has sustained at this point in his career. Meniscus tears left and right, all the other issues that he's dealt with. And I would be naive if I not mention, like, I do think he could use to lose a little bit of weight. Now, my pushback here and what I think gets overlooked a lot is those aren't things that go together quite well. Like the best thing for Joel Embiid certainly is not running suicides on a daily basis when factoring in like these knee issues. So I think he gets like a lot of hate for like he'll miss 6 weeks recovering from an injury, and then people will be like, he looks so out of shape. It's like, well, what did you think you could be doing at that point? Like, sure, maybe you can get on the stationary bike a little bit or do low impact situations, but that's not replicating playing basketball. So it's a tough balance that he has to walk. I do think it would be best for him to cut a couple LBs and look a little thinner, a little closer to the 2018-19 version of Joel or how he came in the league. But the reality is, like, I think the injuries are the driving force of all this. I think he's naturally like a very big dude, and that like when he lets himself fill out, he certainly that happens pretty quickly. So I wish that to be the case, but I think it gets held against him a little bit more than he should, and that injuries are the real answer here.